Hello, my name is Brett Formosa, and welcome to a Unity tutorial video series for beginners. For this series, I will go through each step with the mindset that all you've done is install Unity with no prior research or experience to make sure everyone can feel included and learn as we go. You can contact me either through the comment section down below, by visiting my personal website, or by leaving a message on my itch.io page. The links are in the description of this video. Last video, we made the score increase whenever the player game object hit the top of the screen. We also learned how to call one script's function through another separate script in the easiest way. In this video, we will learn how to create a timer using coroutines, a new piece of coding that we haven't delved into. Let's get started with part 7. In the hierarchy, right-click, go to UI, then click on Slider. This will create a slider game object in the canvas. Sliders are quite versatile, as they can be used for a number of different mechanics. They can be used as health bars or any type of UI element similar to a health bar, either as an actual bar similar to Street Fighter, a health system such as Diablo's Globe Health Pool, or even a heart system similar to The Legend of Zelda. Sliders can also be used for a countdown bar, which is what we're going to be using our current slider game object for. They can be used to cycle through the character customization or settings and menus. The list of uses are extensive for sliders. As mentioned, this slider is going to be used to give a visual representation on how much time is left for the current game when it starts. Let's change the slider game object name to timer. We can also anchor it to the opposite side of the screen as the score UI. Let's anchor it to the middle left side of the screen. Let's rotate the game object by 90 degrees, and let's scale it to fit the entire left side of the screen and make it a little more visible. In the slider component for our slider or timer, uncheck the interactable checkmark so that the player cannot manipulate the timer. The slider component has a lot of options. However, most of the options only matter when the slider is interactable. Since ours is not, I'm only going to go over the options that we need to change for our game to work. The direction option near the bottom of the component is the direction that the slider moves. For our game, if the rotation for your slider is rotated at a positive 90 degrees, then you'll want your slider's direction to be left to right. If your slider is rotated negative 90 degrees, you'll want your slider direction to be right to left. The min and max value for the slider component is the minimum and maximum value that the slider will be depending on where the handle is located. For our instance, the handle will be at the top of the screen and work its way down, with the value being how many seconds are left in the game. So, the min value will be 0, and the max value can be anywhere between 45 to 180 if we want to follow the original Space Race's timer. I'm going to set my max value to 45. We also want to check whole numbers, since our timer won't have anything smaller than seconds. If you move the value slider, you can see the handle move up and down the slider game object, which would simulate how the timer will look for our game. Let's open the timer game object if you haven't already by clicking the arrow in the hierarchy. Click on background. We're going to change how the timer looks to properly make our timer look the part. The main thing we need to change for background is the color in the image component. Let's change that to black. Let's click on fill area in the timer game object. The only thing we need to change with this is to make sure that the fill matches as best as possible with the background portion of the timer game object. Keep in mind, even when the timer goes to 0, there will still be a portion of the timer visible as the slider never fully diminishes or goes away. You'll see what I mean when we finish changing the timer game object, and I'll mention it again. Click on fill inside the fill area. That is also inside the timer game object. Here, we are going to make it blocky to have a similar aesthetic as the original arcade game. Click on the circular button on the right portion of the source image. A pop-up window will appear with a handful of different sprites that are built into Unity. We will look for one that is called Sprite Shape Fill. This will make the timer appear blocky. We can now also delete the handle slide area portion of the game object because we don't need a handle for our timer. Let's now change the value of the slider to 0, and you can see that there will be some timer left over, like I mentioned before. Let's move that off screen and then play with the size of the timer to make sure it fits properly while also hiding the portion of the timer that doesn't go away. With the UI element created, we need to make sure we write some code that will manipulate the timer game object while the game is being played. Let's add a script to the timer game object, and let's name that Countdown UI. For this script, we want it to manipulate the timer game object to change the timer's value from the max value, mine being 45, to the minimum value of 0, with the value decreasing by 1 every second. With that knowledge in mind, we obviously need a couple variables. The first is the slider variable, since we need to manipulate a slider game object. With this, we need to add a new library we have never added before. So at the top, let's write using unityengine.ui. This library adds UI game object elements similar to when we wrote the using TM Pro library when we were manipulating the Score TextMesh Pro game object. Let's now add a public slider countdown slider variable and also a public int current time variable. In the start function, let's make sure the slider and the current time are connected. Let's write countdown slider dot max value equals current time, and we'll also add countdown slider dot value equals current time. What those lines of code mean is that the max value of the slider will be whatever we write the current time variable to be in the inspector. So we don't have to constantly change the max value of the slider if we change what we want the time limit to be. We also want the slider's value to be whatever the maximum time is at the start of the game, so we also change the value of the slider to be whatever the current time is at the beginning of the game. We need to write a countdown function, so let's write public void countdown. In the curly brackets, we will write an if statement that won't have anything yet, but we will at least start it. So let's write if current time is greater than 0. Let's write something we haven't written before, and that is an IEnumerator. That will have a coroutine. An IEnumerator is a necessary bit of code when writing a coroutine. It is also very complex on what it actually is, so I'll leave this explanation for another video. If you want to do some research for yourself, however, I definitely recommend learning more about IEnumerators on your own time, as it is always best to understand what you're writing for code when you use it. We will write IEnumerator countdown active. In the curly brackets, we will now write yield return new, wait for seconds, and then in parentheses 1, followed by current time minus minus, and finally countdown slider dot value equals current time. Let's dissect this code so you can understand what it does. When the countdown active IEnumerator is called, it will wait 1 second due to the yield return new wait for seconds 1. The 1 in the wait for seconds indicates a number of seconds you want to pass. If there were a 2 in the parentheses, then it will wait for 2 seconds as an example. After the 1 second passes, it moves on to the next lines of code, similar to how all the functions we have been writing work. So after the second passes, the current timer is subtracted by 1. The value of the slider changes to reflect the current time. Let's return to the if statement and write in the curly brackets start coroutine, and then in parentheses, countdown active, parentheses. When this line of code executes, it will trigger the IEnumerator coroutine until the current time is 0 or less than 0. One thing we need to add is a way that will stop the IEnumerator from being executed multiple times, which would screw up the timer. We can do this by adding a bool. It's sort of like a duct tape method of making sure it's not executing multiple times, but in this instance, it will do what we need. Let's add a new private bool, start timer. A bool is a true or false variable. There is nothing else really for it. If a bool is 0 or false, you can do one thing, versus if a bool is 1 or true. Let's get back down to the coroutine we created, and let's add a new line at the bottom that says start timer equals false. Now we just need to add another if statement to activate the bool, which will then only activate the countdown to work when we need it to work. So let's create a fixed update function. Fixed update is similar to update, but the key difference is that update is called on every frame of the game, while fixed update is called on every frame of the physics engine portion of Unity. Typically, this happens in a more fixed rate than the update, as it isn't specific to computer specifications. In the fixed update function, we are going to write if exclamation point start timer. And then in the curly brackets, we will write start timer equals true and then countdown. Outside of the curly brackets, we will write else return. What this means is that if the start timer isn't active, it will then activate the start timer by making it true and then starting the countdown function while the countdown function is going on. If fixed update gets called again, it won't re-execute the countdown function as start timer is already being executed, so it will return back to the starting of the code. Once the countdown function executes and the current time variable removes a second, then it will deactivate the timer to be restarted for the next second to take off. This may be a little confusing, but think of it in this way. Fixed update may get called to execute every half of a second, for example. It will flow like this. Start timer equals true, countdown executes, current time is greater than 0 as it's 45, countdown active executes, waits a second, then subtracts current time by 1, making it 44. Start timer equals false. Start timer is false. Let's make it true and repeat the entire process over again, but current time will be 44 instead of 45. Once this repeats until current time is 0, it will then stop the entire process. Hopefully that makes a little more sense. If not, please comment down below on what part is confusing, and I will try my best to respond in a more concise way. Let's save this script and jump back into Unity. Let's click on the timer game object and scroll to the newly created script. Now let's change the current time to 45 or whatever number you want, and then attach the timer game object to the countdown slider box. Let's hit play and see what happens with the timer. As you can see, every second the timer goes down by 1, which is exactly what we set out to do for this video. With that in mind, I'm going to let you take a break here and end the tutorial. In the next video, we will create a game over screen when either the timer reaches 0 or when the maximum score is reached. The game over screen will also have the ability to do 3 things: exit the game, go to the main menu, or restart the game again. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.